Coming up on Chopper's Political Podcast.
Can I say they're being a bit of an arse?
Yes.
On your podcast?
The word arse is acceptable.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Chopper's Political Podcast, where I bring you the best guest gossip, news and stories from our studios here at GB News in the heart of Westminster. This week, the Labour government finally set out its plans of how it wants to deliver on change for so many Brits, putting its money where its mouth is by spending hundreds of billions of pounds, mainly, or a lot of it, in the Red Wall, the north of England. There were big increases in day-to-day spending in science, health, defence, and cuts for transport, trade and the environment. Now, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, on Wednesday told his cabinet that this spending review marks the first stage of government as we move to a phase that delivers on the promise of change for the British people. But after a week in which Labour won positive headlines for its various spending announcements on health and defence and elsewhere, attention is now focusing towards the end of the week on how we pay for it all. Speaking to me hours after spending review, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, told me this.
Taxes won't need to go up to pay for what is in this spending review. Now, I'm not going to write 4 years' worth of budgets within the first year of this government, but we took the action that was necessary last year to put our public finances on a firm footing and put that immediate injection of cash into our public services. And we've allocated the funding for day-to-day spending for the next 3 years and for capital spending for the remainder of this Parliament.
Now, if you listen very carefully to what the Chancellor told me, she said there clearly there's nothing announced in Wednesday's spending review that needs further tax increases. But what about things that aren't in that spending review, perhaps like lifting the two-child benefit cap, which will cost billions? I also grabbed the Institute for Fiscal Studies Director Paul Johnson on College Green outside Parliament after the spending review. He had this to say to me on whether taxes may now have to go up.
If the forecasts remain exactly as they were in the spring statement, then we won't need further tax increases. But we never have a world in which nothing changes. Chancellor's going to have to hope they change in the right direction. I think they're more likely to change in the wrong direction.
Paul Johnson there shortly after the spending review. Now, I spoke to Paul Johnson before the spending review at greater length when he reflected on the tax and spend choices facing Labour and his plans for the future. He's leaving the IFS very shortly. But that's for later in the podcast. But first, while I was watching the spending review a few metres above Rachel Reeves from the press gallery, I was struck by the way she name-checked so many towns and cities in the Red Wall of England, places where Nigel Farage's Reform UK is surging. It sounds to me a bit like a GB News weather forecast. We often list the name, the temperatures of places where our viewers and listeners live, and they love that. And in a sense, it was pointing out the weather for GB News. So I thought who better to ask this morning about the spending review and the effect on the so-called Red Wall than Jonathan Hinder, Labour MP for Pendle and Clitheroe, and a member of the Blue Labour Group of Labour MPs. Jonathan, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Now, how did you find that announcement? Were you impressed by it? Did it touch all the hot buttons you're worried about?
Well, the thing that stuck out to me was exactly what you just said, which was that emphasis on areas which have been starved of public investment for
Dozens of places named by her.
Absolutely. And it was great to hear that. And it's an acknowledgement, I think, of the fact that we are the most economically imbalanced country in the developed world. And that's actually been getting worse. So we saw some research this week saying that actually if the North had had the same kind of investment as London over the last 10 years, we would have been able to build 7 crossrails with that. So we really need to stop entrenching that regional inequality and actually start tackling it. So I was absolutely delighted to hear that emphasis on the north of England and other regions of the UK.
Capital spending.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big projects.
And that's the key thing for me. It is about lifting those areas up economically rather than the transfers of wealth that we've seen over the decades with London, bringing in the tax receipts, spreading that out artificially, if you like, to the Red Wall.
And to do that, she's fiddled with the value for money calculation they're making in the Treasury, the so-called Green Book.
Yeah.
Because the Treasury wants to get maximum bang for its buck, and therefore it's been spending money in the south of England where wages are better and people higher incomes are. So getting money spent in the north is important, and she has done that for you, it seems.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's really encouraging. I think what we've got to acknowledge is that the Treasury has historically been more focused on fiscal policy rather than economic policy.
Yeah.
So it's about the.
What's that mean to the listeners?
So it basically means that they are investing in places where they think they're going to get the quickest, biggest return, rather than thinking about the economic welfare of the whole country. So it needs that political leadership.
Are you worried, though, about the length of time it might take to do this? Because projects take time and the election is only 3.5 years away.
Well, absolutely, we've got to move as quickly as possible. But I think that's a reason to praise the government rather than criticise it, which is taking those long-term decisions. So we saw that with the trailing of the investment on nuclear.
Yeah.
Actually, we're not going to see the full benefits of that for quite some time. But that's even more of a reason to welcome it, because it's taking a long-term decision. Famously, we've had other parties saying there's no point going for nuclear because it'll take 10 years, like Nick Clegg did in 2010.
It's blocked by the Lib Dems.
Yeah, and look where we are now. What a better position we would be in if we'd had that decision taken.
Be on stream years now, wouldn't it?
Well, exactly.
Might as well see. Not much room for manoeuvre. We heard Paul Johnson there saying if growth stays where it's meant to be, you'll be okay for no more tax rises, which the Chancellor pledged to us but last November. Are you worried about that?
Well, it's definitely a concern that we haven't had the growth in this country for a long time that we would have done if forecasts prior to the financial crisis were correct. So, yes, absolutely. I think we've got to think carefully about where we spend our money. I want it to be on that investment as much as it is, a focus on the day-to-day spending, which is important, of course.
How much of this lack of growth is your government's fault? The increase in national insurance employers, the increase in minimum wage, there's a big squeeze on hospitality, isn't it? And we're seeing jobs, the workforce falling or forecast to fall in April and May.
Well, I think it's been a long-term issue which has been ailing Western economies that we're seeing is this low growth, and actually it's those long-term investment decisions which are going to get us out of this. We don't want a short-term sugar rush, so I'm backing the government to make those long-term decisions.
Yeah, but it's right, is it, to increase taxes on employers? It's now more expensive to hire people, isn't it?
Well, we wouldn't have been able to invest in public services in the way that we have in this spending review. I think most people would accept that our infrastructure in this country and our public services are crumbling. They're not in a good place. And, you can look back at historically low interest rates wasted under the Conservative years, but that's gone now. We've got to deal with what we've got. We said we were...
spent 400 billion on the energy shock and COVID. That's where the money's gone.
Yeah,
so to be fair, the Tory party.
And you have to be honest about where we are as a country, having made that kind of choice. Yeah.
HS2 Northern Leg, nothing on that. A shame.
Well,
only you and me talking, Jonathan. No one's listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's a farce, isn't it? I mean, the whole HS2 debacle is a good little microcosm of where I think we've gone wrong with public investment in this country. We are so tied up in the bureaucracy, in the planning regulations, and the government is acting to unblock that, which is to their enormous credit.
But the red tape, the bat tunnel,
all of that,
£29 million on to protect bats. Absolutely. I mean, at some point, someone said, and I did hear actually the guys who built that said that was the cheapest way to deal with the regulations. We build a bat tunnel. Yeah. The regs can't be right, can they?
It's insane. Absolutely insane. So I'm really glad the government is acting on this. And the thing that stops us building infrastructure in this country is not actually the time it takes to build it. It is all of that planning stuff. So, yeah, a real farce. I want to see not just better connections between, Manchester and London, as would have been then. Of course, it was about capacity, not speed. This is what I say to people all the time. And I travel on that every week on that line. And, every time I get stuck behind...
Well, it became that. It started off as being speed, and that's why they tunnelled so much under the Chilterns to do a straight line. If they had followed the motorways, it would have been a curved line for capacity, not speed. But I think they spec'd it wrong at the beginning.
Yeah. I think
tunneling is so expensive.
There's an argument for that. But when I speak to my constituents, they say, well, I'm more bothered about the train services in my constituency rather than connecting the big cities.
HS2, get on with it, Chancellor. Is that what you're saying?
Well,
golden leg.
I think there are other things that we can spend our investment money on. I'm not going to get tied up on that particular project. I think it's an example of where we've gone wrong. I want to see better connections for towns like those.
Northern Powerhouse Rails announced by the
Yeah, wouldn't it be great? But the thing I said to the Chancellor yesterday, when she briefed MPs after the spending review, was we want to see investment for the towns, not just the cities. So it's great that Manchester and Leeds, the nearby cities to my constituency, are getting that investment, connections between them. But we want to see the towns like those I represent.
I'm always struck by town centres and how sad they feel. With GB News, I deliberately get out and about into the towns in the north, and from the north as well, and I just get really sad because all the old independent shops appear to have gone. Some of the chains are retreating from the town centres.
Yeah.
They feel quite sad. I do a lot of broadcasting at 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. from them, and there are no shoppers around.
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks to the cost of living, doesn't it? If people haven't got money in their pockets to spend, then they're not going to go onto those high streets and spend it. What I would say, though, is we can, as a government and as a left-wing government who's steering the economy in the direction we would like, we can say, actually, we are going to favour those high street businesses over the big corporates who are selling online.
Rates issue, business rate issue.
Absolutely.
The budget coming up.
And the government is already making moves in that direction, which I'm encouraged by.
And what did she say to you, Rachel? What was her answer when you raised your concerns last night?
She absolutely understood it. I made the political point as well, of course, that's where the general elections are now fought, is in the towns.
Yes.
Not in the cities. Look at the majority sizes in the towns rather than in cities. So she received it well.
Good point. Asylum hotels, saving $1 billion on those by the end of this decade. That's currently running at $3.1 billion. Ending the use of asylum hotels, thank goodness, everyone would agree with that. But moving them into communities, HMOs, houses of multiple occupation, risking increasing tensions if they displace people who are waiting for a flat, maybe a social housing flat.
Well,
that's the worry.
It's encouraging that we are not going to have people in hotels, but I would say that's not the core issue here. The core issue is stopping illegal migration.
1,000 arriving this year across the southern border.
Yeah, and I said on Michelle's show the other night, I said we need to tackle this issue and we need to remove every legal obstacle.
Bring back Rwanda, Jonathan.
I don't know about a chaotic policy like that, but there does need to be a deterrent, and it's no good politicians continuing to say to the public, we hear you, but it's all too difficult. And this speaks to some of the things I've been saying about democratic power. We want the government to run the country, make the decisions to secure our borders. We can restore faith in politics.
What deterrent would you do?
Well, I think you've got to say that the chances of you being able to stay here if you arrive on British soil are currently far too high. So it is about those increased returns. It is about processing things much more quickly. But you do need that deterrent. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of what I would recommend.
Why not do it now?
But what I would say is that at the moment it is too appealing for people to come over. And if we had that deterrent, then the boats would stop coming.
Come over, you probably stay for quite a while. You get a hotel room, you get maybe other, warm weather. We look after people because we're a welcoming nation. The ECHR is part of the problem. I mean, you're battling against Reform UK. They say leave it. Robert Jenrick says leave it. The Tories are going towards leaving or elements of the European Convention on Human Rights.
Yeah.
Is it time for that kind of chat in the Labour Party?
Well, it's not functioning properly. That's absolutely clear. If you look at the treaty that was signed to create it, it bears no resemblance in some of the decisions that are being made now. And, we are really talking about
judges for that, do you?
Well, it's judicial activism in many cases. I mean, we see some of these crazy decisions that are being made on the basis of a right to family life. There was a famous case in Switzerland not so long ago. And, that's not what was intended. So I understand why people kind of balk at the idea of talking about a human rights treaty having to be changed or whatever. But either we need to seriously reform it or we need to think about whether it's fit for purpose at all. So it's not about stripping away.
About leaving it, Jonathan.
Well, it's not about stripping away human rights, but it's saying this is not fit for purpose. We need to make sure it is, whatever framework it is. And I go back to what I said.
You leave it.
Well, I say every legal obstacle should be removed. And if we can do that within the ECHR, that's absolutely fine by me. That's absolutely fine by me.
Well, so you're not saying leave it just, are you?
I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is it isn't fit for purpose. So we do need to look at reform at the very minimum.
You mentioned deterrent. I mean, I was when the Keir Starmer on the second day in that press conference in Downing Street announced we're going to junk the Rwanda plan. Now, it did cost 400 million. 2 people went there voluntarily because they were seeing whether they were proving to judges it was a safe country. That's why that happened. Why not give it a go? Because all that money spent, all our you, me, others, tax money went into this project. Why not see if it works rather than axe it altogether?
Well, that decision's been made. It was a chaotic policy. Obviously, the Conservative government didn't seem to know how to. No, I don't think it was. But I do think we've got to be creative on this stuff. And we are going to have a deterrent. That was an attempt to have one in a completely chaotic, incompetent way. But we are going to need a deterrent.
And it did drive all attention towards that, and it allowed the big bit of legacy claim,
which the government has made some progress on.
We understand that, we get that. Yeah. So maybe an offshore processing plan.
I think we should be open to lots of options,
like Albania or somewhere. Although they won't do it with us, they're saying. Well, where do you sit on net zero? Isn't Nigel Farage onto something when he says he wants to reopen coal mines? I mean, do you think that's a silly idea?
I don't think we're reopening coal mines. That's not there. I don't know. I don't think we're onto that. I think Nigel Farage seems to have a very kind of thin grasp of the science on this stuff. I know he was talking about restarting the blast furnaces.
That's not possible, apparently.
Fantasy physics as well as fantasy economics from Farage.
But he goes to something that their position is: we're sitting on what they call treasure, the coal under this country. Why can't we use part of it to help with steel production? Because there are some crazy things on net zero. We're shipping in, aren't we?
Yeah.
Wood pellets from America to fire up power stations here. He's talked about something, I think, which is concerning.
Well, it's definitely worth saying that our green energy policies need to be taken in the round. There is no point offshoring our carbon emissions.
We are at the moment.
But in some cases, that is happening. So what I would say is oil and gas are a crucial part of our energy mix, and they are going to be for some time to come. But I think most people in this country, when I speak to constituents on the doorstep, they say, I'm absolutely for green energy. Let's go for it. Let's go for nuclear. Let's go for wind. We're a windy island after all. Let's make the most of it. For goodness sake, let's make sure that as much of it is being manufactured in the UK as well, because we have fallen behind on this stuff. A lot of the solar panels are coming from China because they've got so far ahead of us on this. So that's where it comes to that kind of British industrial policy that I want to see, so that we're building and making things in this country, good jobs, so that we're ahead of the rest on green energy.
But are we turning our back too quickly on the North Sea, for example?
I don't know about too quickly, but what I would say is it's not just about downing tools straight away and then relying on stuff from abroad. I think that's a false economy.
Your background, of course, you're a police constable, formerly a sergeant and inspector. You're the head of the Police Now Training Academy. Police are worried about law and order, aren't they? In the wake of this spending review, they say there's going to be a problem here. We're keeping the streets safe. Do you worry too?
Well, we set ambitious targets as a Labour Party for what we want to achieve with policing, and it is going to be difficult to deliver those. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more support for the police in that regard, but they are still getting above inflation increase in spending every year, which is encouraging. And of course, the reason why policing is in such a state is because we've actually got a really inexperienced workforce, which we've had to scramble to get back to the same levels we were at when the Conservatives took power. Of course, it was Dominic Cummings who revealed to them it was probably a bad idea to put 20,000 officers and 20% of the funding.
Yes.
So, yes, there's a huge amount to do on policing. I really want to back the police as a force for good. And I think it's really important that we give officers the confidence to go out there, which I think has been lacking in recent years because they've been so fearful of the media backlash and from some politicians, of course. So, yeah, I really want to see us back the police across the country, and that's what my constituents want to.
Do you worry, though, about these cuts? I mean, you did pledge as a party in government to crack down on antisocial behaviour. Police are saying they're going to have a problem here.
Well, it's a problem of demand in the sense that 30 years ago we weren't really dealing with domestic abuse or sexual offences. Now it's a core part of police business, as it should be. But then if you combine that with reducing the police workforce by 20,000 officers, you've got a bit of a perfect storm.
Yeah.
And so the police now are pulled in different directions. We want the traditional neighbourhood presence.
Yeah.
That's key. We want to deal with the high harm offences, like the ones I just mentioned. Serious violence, of course, as well in the cities. And then we also have this other area, which is the kind of non-crime stuff, which has increased over the years.
Which is nuts, right?
Well,
Stop policing Twitter.
Well, that's a part of it. That's a part of it.
Oh, yeah,
I would say.
to stop going after people for tweets.
Well, I think police need to make sure they've got their priorities right, and I think there have been some particularly egregious examples of big overreach in that regard. And I think the police would say, well, some of our laws probably do need updating on this. They're not fit for the internet age. But it's not just that. It's about mental health cases, about children missing from care homes. That's what I spent a lot of my career dealing with.
That's serious.
So we've got to be kind of having this discussion.
I feel sorry for the police because when they knock on doors of parents over a WhatsApp group, and they cause a big round of the press, it undermines trust in the police.
I think we've got to be clear. This is where I would sum it up. We've got to be clear about where we think people are acting in a way that we don't like. Can I say they're being a bit of an arse?
Yes.
On your podcast.
The word arse is acceptable.
Yeah. And where that goes into what we want to be a police matter. And I think at the moment, the threshold has probably been set a little bit too low, and we're asking police to get involved with people who are being a bit of an arse, but probably don't need the police knocking at them.
And stop doing that. I mean, even Keir Starmer talked about this back when he was DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions. He said people do silly tweets and a bit drunk. Let's let them delete it the next day and move on.
I think there's a lot to be
said
said for that.
There's a woman being jailed. I mean, famously, of course, with some extremely, I would say, inflammatory remarks on Twitter, but she regretted them. But despite being put in prison for it,
there's always going to be a kind of contested discussion about where that line should be. But yeah, as I say, I think we need to make sure it's a little bit higher.
Council tax looks like it's going up, maybe by 5%, in part to fund policing through the precept. That is a problem. I mean, council tax is a problem for so many people. It will be going up. And do you worry about this?
I do. And I've actually been very vocal about council tax. I want to see it completely reformed. So I've got a constituency or Pendle part of my constituency where 60% of the properties are Band A.
Band A. So
Band A. So the lowest amount.
Lowest.
So
which means what? They're not very expensive, doesn't it?
It means they're not very expensive. And so the cheapest housing in the country. But it also means that the local council can't raise much revenue without the overall level. I know this is quite technical, but hopefully your listeners will appreciate it. They can't raise much revenue themselves because they've got a certain housing stock. Whereas if you look at some boroughs of London, it's quite the opposite.
What's the idea then?
Well, my idea is that you actually make it related to the property value, what you pay. So I put something online not so long ago saying that actually my constituents are paying double what some in West London are paying when they own a £200,000 house. This house is worth over £1 million.
That's nuts.
Everyone in the House of Commons, everyone in the country knows that is nuts. But this has been allowed to happen over decades with no one wanting to make the difficult decisions on it. So I would say to the government, please, if you want to make our taxation system fairer, to reduce it for the majority of households, which this would do.
Pay the money to central pots and it gets passed out by the government. Is that right?
Well, I mean, the mechanics of it can be discussed, but this kind of attitude of, well, Pendle Council should be able to raise what they can on the basis of this council tax system, which they're locked into, is crazy. So let's make that a lot fairer. I don't think a lot of people in the country realise quite how it is.
It's something a wealth tax to me, Jonathan. Is that what you do?
Well, it's a form of wealth tax. It is, and what I would say is we want to have as low tax as possible for ordinary people. And we've got this enormous wealth in the country. Could they pay a little bit more tax? Of course they could. They've got a £1.5 million house. They paid half my constituents pay.
In cash full, jolly well.
There will be a few of those cases, and you can legislate
how big house worth.
You can legislate to allow for
those some food out though. That's all. That's what will happen.
You can do it on the basis of when they sell the property, they then pay it or something like that. Yeah.
Is the government looking at this?
Not that I'm aware, but I'd like them to.
Hey, they'll be tuning into this podcast.
I'm sure.
Just finally, before we let you go, grooming gang scandal. You're worried about that. Why is this government not doing a national inquiry? We think there are 50 towns affected by this. Jeez.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what Louise Casey says on this.
She's doing an assessment on the scale of it nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely right that the government has asked for that, and I'll be looking at what her conclusions are very closely.
If she finds 50 towns, should there be a national inquiry?
We need a national reckoning on this, and I would say that we should be seriously thinking about whether a national inquiry is required. Let's have a look at what Louise Casey has to say.
I accept that. If the scale is what Charlie Peters has found, our reporter on this issue, 50 towns affected, and there's read across between, it looks like because it's so sensitive with who are the perpetrators, that it's been, a blind eye has been turned by authorities, and that's what's so offended so many people, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is that idea that things have been covered up because of cultural sensitivities. We cannot have that.
No.
If we want to have trust in our...
trust in law and order.
Absolutely. And it undermines, the kind of cohesive communities that we want. So we need to ensure that those who are responsible are held to account, and really encourage that the police are making really good progress in terms of the arrests and prosecutions. That is really good. But in terms of the system, in terms of the councils and police officers as well,
and I would say it goes beyond. It's not a labour issue. It's a cultural issue in this country. It goes back 30 years. This problem, which no one has gripped it in authority, I think.
Yeah,
and to take the politics away from it, it's just doing right by the victims. They're often on GB News, and it breaks your heart,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say I don't know whether going through inquiry after inquiry is necessarily what the victims want.
Lessons learned, maybe.
But if we don't feel like we have had that cultural shift to call out these things, no matter the race, no matter the religion, etc., then we should be considering that.
And just finally, you're at GB News. Nigel Farage's broadcasts here in the evenings. Does Keir Starmer get Nigel Farage? I asked Keir Starmer, is he living rent free in your brain? I mean, there's a concern about Farage, isn't there? Does your leader understand how to combat that?
Well, I think
his electoral threat, I mean.
Yeah, I think he does. I mean, I think if you see the way that he has quite openly said he sees reform as a big threat, then you can see that he understands that the Conservative Party really are flailing. They've got such a poor record to go on, and people want change. We know that. They want quite radical change, and if they don't get it, will pull the next lever they think will deliver that.
What's your advice to your leader on battling Farage? You're seeing it locally, aren't you, with Reform UK? What's your advice nationally?
Well, I would say the Blue Labour position of being slightly to the left on economics, but also sensible on issues like immigration, on crime, etc., would be very popular in the country. We need to double down on that, and I think we'll win a majority at the next election.
We'll wait and see. Jonathan Hinder, thank you for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Great to see you in the studio. Thank you for your excellent interview there. With me now is Paul Johnson, who runs the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which is the most important independent economic expert which passes judgment on any big fiscal announcement from the government the day after. Paul, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast.
Thank you.
For your valedictory tour of the studios, I think, because you're off soon.
Yes, well, certainly the last as head of the IFS, but this will be my last spending review, last fiscal event. I'm going to be very sad come the next budget when I'm not going to be around here in Westminster commenting to everybody.
And you've done a lot of them. How many years?
Oh, it's 15 years worth, so probably more than 30 since we've had more than 2 a year in some years.
Now, what have you learned over that time? So you probably started with austerity under George Osborne. It went into spending money more willingly and debt going up under following Tory PMs. Then you've got this new Iron Chancellor in quotes. I mean, what do you divine a kind of a streak of what they have in them that makes them chancellors, even though from different persuasions, or are they all just a bit? What are they like? Do you see anything similar between them all?
Well, they are. I mean, they have all, with the exception of Kwasi Kwarteng, talks about fiscal prudence and needing to keep to fiscal rules and all those sorts of things. They've all been laxer in reality than they have said that they would be. I mean, even George Osborne, I perfectly sensibly sort of pushed off the point at which he got to budget balance as things didn't go as well as he hoped. Although he really, he was the one where you could really say this is what he was trying to achieve. He was really pushing spending down and implementing austerity.
The deficit, wasn't it? A target to get that long deficit, which went towards. I mean, just obviously we're speaking in the week of the spending review. How worried are you about the UK economy as things stand?
Well, I've been worried for a long time. It's, I mean, the truth is this has been the worst, getting on for 20 years now, that we've had for, well, certainly more than a century in terms of persistent lack of economic growth. And, well, what does economic growth matter? Well, at the same time, we've had the worst period for earnings growth, as far as we can tell, since Napoleon was trying to, come over. Nearly 20 years now with barely any growth in real average earnings. So, I mean, I think we've been worried for a long time. And we are still to some extent living in the shadow of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009.
So it's pre-financial crisis was the last time we had it pretty good here. And since then, it's been pretty grim.
I think that's sadly, you look. I mean, obviously, it differs for different people, and some people have had it absolutely fine over the last period, and some people have had it grim for a long period.
Assets have gone up, haven't they? Homes and the like.
Yeah, but again, actually, if you look back more over that period pre-financial crisis, but they carried on post that period. So, one of the consequences of this, if you don't have much earnings growth and you do have asset growth, then one group have done better than others, and that group that's done relatively well is the older group who had some wealth 15, 20 years ago.
And that's pension. They're being protected increasingly by the leaders, aren't they?
Well, as we've seen with the winter fuel payment, you just can't ever take anything from them.
No. I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, does it make sense to you that around the edges, 35,000, if you have two earners in the same house on 34,000, it goes back to the child benefit change, doesn't it, I think?
Yeah, so I mean, it's we've got this very old situation now where if you've got two pensioners each with income of 34,000, they get £200. You've got £100 each, £200 in total. If you've got one who might have an income of very, very high income, £100,000, £200,000, but has a partner with 30,000, they'll still get £100. But if you've got two of you with £36,000 each, you get nothing at all. So it's a very sort of complex thing. We've ended up with this horrible compromise from a government which clearly wanted to get rid of the payment altogether. In my view, and this probably won't make me popular with your listeners, perfectly sensibly. I mean, this is an absurd payment. But we've seen the
Gordon Brown brought in, didn't he?
Well, I mean,
response to another crisis.
I mean, who is to blame for this in the end? Actually, it's Gordon Brown bringing it in 25 years ago, or so. I mean, what we discover is as soon as you bring something like that in, whether it's a benefit for pensioners or whether it's a tax break or whether it's a new service like childcare, you basically can't ever take it away.
So we've had 20 years of no growth, as far as you're saying, and that's
not quite none, but incredibly little.
Anemic, within a word, perhaps around 1%, 2%. Not a lot then compared to other countries. Do you blame the Tories or Labour? Everyone's got their own answers, haven't they? Well, what's the problem in this country?
And part of this is that we had a big financial sector, so the financial crisis hit us harder than it did a lot of other countries. We've also had a long period of poor policy making, whether it's a hopeless tax system or incredibly bad planning systems. It's very hard to build things. Education system that doesn't work very well for people who don't go on to university a lot. And some people who do, a lack of investment in infrastructure, building things. So there's a whole series of things which have been true over a period of time, under both governments. I mean, it is true to say that the economy slowed again after the Brexit vote.
And that was bad for the country, Brexit, as far as you're concerned?
In terms of the economic impact, I mean, you can see that in big reduction, actually, over the last few years in numbers of firms that are trading, particularly trading with the European Union, and you can see it in what happened to the pound and what happened to inflation in the period after the Brexit referendum. Now, I think the other thing that's worth saying, it's actually very hard to tell what is the effect of Brexit and what is the effect of the political chaos that ensued. I think it's really interesting to ask the question, suppose Remain had won 52-48, would we have had a period of political calm in which everything was going well? And I think the answer is no. So actually, it may well have been the fact that we were always going to have a really difficult period after, if we were going to have a referendum and the result was going to be close.
Yes.
I think we were always up for a difficult period, both politically and then economically, because bad politics actually makes for bad economics.
So moving to the present then with Labour, we're seeing impacts on their policies. The ONS figures today showing maybe staff numbers cut by 140,000 in April and May. I think some of those figures are estimated. Do you blame the national insurance increase and the minimum wage hike?
they almost certainly played a role. It's very difficult to, first of all, as you say, those numbers are uncertain.
Very certainly uncertain.
And there's lots of uncertainty around a lot of ONS figures at the moment. And secondly, lots of things are going on. But we do know that, I mean, where have jobs, where have we got fewer jobs? Well, it's in retail and hospitality. Which of the sectors have been hardest hit by the national insurance and minimum wage changes? It's retail and hospitality. We do know it's been made significantly more expensive to employ people on relatively low earnings. So it will have played a role for sure, and that's that is a risk that we've taken with those policies.
One of the big, I think, issues you've always talked about, certainly in your social media messaging, is a lack of honesty about the challenges we face, and you were particularly critical, weren't you, during the election campaign?
Yes, I mean, I think that all of the parties,
all
parties were not honest about the options. I mean, Conservatives and Labour were both saying no spending cuts and no tax rises effectively. I mean, they had some very small ones in there. Or we've seen immediately that the Labour has come out with some very big tax rises in order to fund spending increases that always look very likely under them. And I think the Conservatives probably would have had some tax rises. And if they hadn't, they would have had had some significant spending cuts. It's also worth saying that the Greens on the one hand and Reform on the other, well, significantly less honest about the trade-offs. I mean, we had the Greens suggesting, I can't remember, 200 billion of additional spending and vast additional borrowing, and you had Reform suggesting vast tax cuts paid for by, quotes, efficiency changes. So, you know, the further from the big parties you got, the sort of worse.
They're all the same. And the losers might be the voters. They don't get a fair debate on this area, on the policies themselves.
Yeah, I mean, so you didn't get a clear. I mean, you looked at I mean, you kind of know, broadly speaking, which direction Labour's going to go in relative to the Conservatives, or you might think you do, but you certainly didn't get a clear sense of the options. I think politicians would say, yeah, but if we tell the voters the truth, they ain't going to vote for us. So, I mean, I think the politicians' view is to support the voters rather than the other way around.
Race to the bottom, possibly. We're speaking ahead of the spending review this week. So with all those caveats, what do you want to see in it?
Well, we know what the total spending numbers are going to be. This is not, it's really important to be clear, this is not a moment when Rachel Reeves is saying, I've got some more money to spend. She's taking the budget she gave herself back in the autumn and distributing it. And we know that the big winner, as usual, will be the health service. And that means that there's nothing on average for the rest of government departments. So by the time people are listening to this, they'll know who the relative winners and losers are. And I fear that the losers will be the same group on average that are always losers, the sort of so-called unprotected
Who are they?
Departments. So often local government, often environment, often Home Office and Justice. Now, within that, it looks like the police might get protected and schools and so on might get protected. But to the extent that they're all protected, then the cuts elsewhere are bigger.
Yes, I mean, the NHS, I mean, we've been talking for a long. One of Reform's policies is try and make it into a different model altogether. Maybe you pay into it. Do you think it's time for a more honest chat about the NHS?
I think it is time for a more honest discussion. I mean, it's interesting. It's really, I mean, it's not that easy to have a sensible conversation about pensions here, but it's easier. So we've got increases in pension age, and we talk about different ways in which we increase the pension. Actually, the coalition government reformed the state pensions on. In many other countries, you can't have a sensible conversation about pensions.
In France, you can't.
In France,
they strike in France.
Exactly.
Right.
So by contrast, in many other countries, you can have a much more open conversation about health.
Yes.
Which we just can't have here. And
why is that?
And I mean, well, that's an interesting big question. Health spending is by far the biggest thing the government does, and it's a much bigger fraction of total spending than it was 20 years ago. It just carries on getting bigger and bigger. I think part of the reason is the sort of, the shared history of the NHS being founded back in the 1940s.
It's got a halo that we polish all the time.
It has a halo that we polish, but it's really odd when you talk, when you do sort of surveys of people. They say, yes, we really love the NHS. And then you ask them about their experiences,
yes,
and they tend to be rather often less positive.
It's a brutal truth. There's a two-tier health service. Yes, we all pay into the NHS, and if you can, you pay private healthcare on top of that. That's what a lot of people do, don't they, in work?
Certainly. So an increasing number of employers provide that as a benefit. I think one of my worries is that we risk kind of by accident ending up in a world in which you have a health service for most people and then an increasing minority are paying for their own, rather than a serious conversation about where we want to end up and whether, for example, in Australia, higher income people, if not quite have to buy additional insurance, but they're penalised in the tax system if they don't. So they just accept that there is, if you're better off, you don't get nothing from the health service, but if you put additional in, and you see that in many other countries, it shouldn't be. I'm not saying it's the right thing or the wrong thing, but it shouldn't be beyond the bounds of political debate in the way that it is.
Mm. Of course, national insurance used to be tied, didn't it, to the state pension, didn't it?
Well, national insurance, when it was first when it was first introduced, national insurance was paid at you paid a flat rate.
That's right.
That's why it was called the stamp. You actually got a stamp on your sort of pay packet to say that you paid it, and that gave you rights to unemployment benefit and the state pension and so on. But over time, that link has been lost. I mean, it's now, as you know, fully earnings related, and there is literally no relationship between the national insurance you pay and anything. It's just another tax.
Yeah, quite. Is the state pension sustainable in its current form? As with the PM today in Suffolk, he says we're going to guarantee the triple lock on the pensions. Is that sustainable long term?
I mean, it's worth just summing up. The state pension as we now have it is actually pretty sensible. It's not very generous. It's whatever it is, getting on for £12,000 a year. That's less than state pensions in most countries, but we have a private system on top, and relative to most European countries, we'll be spending a lot less on our state pension. In fact, less than the US, oddly enough. And state pension ages are rising, which makes it more sustainable. But if you don't continue to increase the pension age, and you do continue with the triple lock, then it will take a bigger and bigger fraction of the total economy. So we've got some choices there about how we increase it and at what age we start to take it. And it's going up to 67 over the next couple of years, the state pension age. This government now then has to make a choice about, does it go up to 68 in the late 2030s, or do they wait until the 2040s to do that? I mean, my view is they should do it in the late 2030s.
Get on with it.
Get on with it. When the state pension age was set at 65, a huge fraction of people didn't even make it to 65. Now, at age 65, you've got a life expectancy, I can't remember exactly what, but around about another 20 years. So this is a very different system. Even compared with 1970, life expectancy has risen by something like 10 years, and the state pension age has gone up by 1 so far for men, and more than that, of course, for women.
Should we means test the state pension?
I don't think so. I don't think there's a case for means testing the state pension. I think it's actually really helpful for everyone to have that basic amount to build on. So if you means test the state pension, then that leads to a lot of people thinking, well, what's not much point me saving? So I think it's really helpful to have that at something like probably the current level, keep it at that level relative to earnings, and then people have something to build on.
And the lifetime allowance, should that be brought back? That's been got rid of?
For the amount you can put into a pension before you start. Well, it's complex to bring that back. I think there is a case for having a maximum that you have as a tax advantage total. What I don't think there's a case for, which we have at the moment, is a maximum what you can put in any 1 year. So I think, as usual, governments have got it the wrong way around. So if I haven't a lot of money in 1 year, why can't I put it all in one go? Whereas at the moment, the amount I can put in is constrained in any year, and if I'm a very high earner, it's straight to a very small amount. But I can have as much as I like as long as I put it in over the right period of time. So I would have it exactly the other way around. Put as much as you'd like in any year, and then you might want to decide on a cap to the total.
All the talk tomorrow will be about how you're paying for measures announced in the spending review. Notably, we don't know how they're going to spend or fund this with the winter fuel allowance, over £1 billion. So this autumn, you're expecting tax rises to go up when you're in academia. They'll watch you from afar. You'll be watching with interest.
I'll certainly be watching with interest. Look, what's going to determine what happens in the autumn budget is what happens to the forecasts. Now, I think there's a decent chance, I'm afraid, that the forecasts for the economy and therefore for borrowing will get worse. than they were in the spring, partly because the Office of Budget Responsibility was actually remarkably optimistic in the spring, and partly because some things have got worse. So President Trump's tariffs and the uncertainty around that has slowed world economic growth, and that will have an impact on the UK. Interest rates on government debt, expected interest rates are higher, so that's going to squeeze the amount of headroom the Chancellor has, and she left herself with almost none. So I think there is, I'm afraid, probably a better than 50-50 shot that we'll get some more tax rises in the autumn.
Oh dear, where?
Well, that I don't know.
Where's the software? I mean, goodness gracious.
I mean, but that
Inheritance tax?
Well, come back to your pensions question. I think every time the Treasury needs to raise some money, there's a big sort of soft target, or maybe a soft target, which is to maybe restrict the rate of relief that you get when you put money in, maybe to restrict the lump sum, maybe, as you say, to restrict the total amount that can go into a pension pot. I think it's just terrible that we have this uncertainty in the run up to these fiscal events. We know
every year.
Yeah, we know
We
know in the run up to last budget that probably tens of thousands of people changed their, but they took their money out because they were worried about tax changes.
CGC was a big thing.
They thought, and so everyone breathed a sigh of relief when she didn't do anything, but she didn't say anything at all about the future. Now, if there's one bit of the tax system that needs to be consistent and certain, it's pensions. So this is a 60, 70 year thing from the age of 20 to the end of your retirement. And to have, and the last government did this all over the place. It went up and down and round and round. Nobody knew where they were. How can you plan anything when every single fiscal event you don't know what's going to happen, and then half of them they change it?
It's a credo curve from Paul Johnson.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm getting too excited.
I love it. No, it's good. Just very quickly, wealth taxes. Are you against those? I mean, not against, but what's it?
Well, they're very hard. They're very. I mean, there are a lot. People have different things in mind when they
council tax and new barrel, for example. Well, one would be.
Yeah, exactly. So people have different things in mind. So some people are thinking, there are people that are more than 10 million quid knocking around, and we want to take money from them every year. There are other people who are thinking, well, maybe a one-off tax on everybody, and then, as you say, it might be an increase in the top rate of the council tax. So some of those, so council tax, for example, is ripe for reform, and we're still being taxed on the value of our properties in 1990. In a regressive way, in the sense that the more valuable your property, the lower the fraction of that value you pay. So there's certainly scope to make that a lot better.
Better, but more expensive. But
more expensive.
Or fair, you mean, don't you?
Fairer. More expensive if you've got an expensive property. Less expensive if you've got a less expensive property. At the moment, we're in this mad situation in which a 3-bed semi in Blackpool pays the same council tax as Buckingham Palace. Now,
that's insane.
So that some reform is needed. I would suggest. So as a broader wealth taxes, you really need to talk to a lawyer more than an economist.
Yes.
What you see around the world is that they don't tend to work, because if you are genuinely wealthy, then you can pay a lot of money to lawyers.
Well, you put it as a corporate structure, a company structure.
Find sort of ways to
see it a lot.
You find ways to get around it. And one of the reasons the inheritance tax is pretty unpopular is that people with, say, £2 or £3 million see that they're paying a higher rate of tax than people with £10 or £20 million. You see that in the statistics. It's absolutely true. They do pay more, because if you've got lots of money, it's much easier to find ways around it.
And where's that point when people start to pay money for advisors to avoid this tax? There's a point at which you just put up with your lot, don't you? Then some people pile in, don't they, and try to avoid.
I mean, when you've got significant amounts of wealth beyond your house, I mean, it's pretty hard to avoid. If you've got an owner-occupied house, even if it's worth 2 or 3 million, it's very hard to avoid inheritance tax on that. If you've got 2 or 3 million in the bank, much easier.
There was a Treasury paper that I remember finding back in 2013, 12, when George Osborne axed the top rate of income tax at 50%, they found that 48.5% is the point at which...
Yeah, that was a guesstimate, I think.
Do you remember this number? The point at which the people start, right, I'm going to get the advisors in and avoid a lot more than you do. I think there was a view that that's where that is the...
That's obviously not that precise. But the estimate, and there's a lot of uncertainty about this. The Office of Budget Responsibility, the Inland Revenue, or HMRC, estimated that moving from 50 to 45% wouldn't lose you much revenue. Now, very hard to tell, but it's probably somewhere around there.
Yes. And just finally, the two-child benefit cap, you see that, do you, being removed? I mean, there's pressure politically, I guess, as out of your purview, politics in a sense, but
There's clearly a lot of
very
pressure.
expensive, though.
There's clearly a lot of pressure to change it. I mean, it is a policy which, if you want to reduce child poverty, then that's the most cost-effective, immediate way of doing it. But it does cost $3 billion a year to do. And of course, some people reasonably think, well, if very low income people get their children paid for, what about me? If I'm on average earnings, I want to have it.
That's the very debate happening in number 10 right now, as far as I know.
Yeah, and I suppose the political problem here is they back down on with the fuel payments. They then back down on the two-child limit. It looks like they're easily pushed around, doesn't it?
Well, Paul Johnson, I think you deserve your break from all this, just parsing the government's work. You'll be off to your academic climbs. You'll be probably writing some reports to the government there, would you? Or?
I don't know, I might have annoyed them too much for them to ask me to write any reports, but I hope that I will still stay involved in the real world as well.
Well, good. Look, Paul Johnson from the IFS, the outgoing head of the IFS this summer. Thank you for joining us on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Paul Johnson speaking to me earlier this week, and thank you, of course, to my guest, Jonathan Hinder. I tweet at Christopher Hope on X. What's your Twitter account, Jonathan?
It's Jonathan_Hinder.
There we are. So you can text him and message him on what you think he said about all sorts of things on this podcast. Email me, chopper@gbnews.uk. Don't email Jonathan Hinder unless you have to. If you enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. If you really enjoyed it, please leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to help other people to find it. Thanks to the great team of GB News colleagues behind the podcast, Mick Booker and Jeff Marsh. They are back at Base Camp in Paddington. And the podcast worker bees buzzing around the studio here, Rebecca Nunes and George McMillan. And most importantly of all, thank you again for listening. If you want more Chopper in your life, and they do catch me during the week on GB News with my latest political updates and stories we break hourly on our channel. And keep up to date with our best reporting on gbnews.com. But until next time, from Jonathan Hinder and me, cheerio!